Okay, so welcome everybody. It's great to see you all again, the ones that I can see, and the ones that I can't. This is session 4 of Art and Music Studies. And as per the format this time, we've been calling guests for each of the lectures. And so today we have Manav, who joined us from London, Manav Kadhkiwala. Manav is a music producer, he's a sound engineer, a visual artist, and a designer. He's been working with a whole host of spaces over the last few years, and both his visual work and his musical work, it looks at concepts of chaos, entropy, randomness. He's actually been looking at a lot of generative processes to work with visuals, to work with sound. And today he's going to actually take us through some of the sort of driving impulses behind his work, as well as a history of audiovisual techniques, processes, and artistries that he's been sort of looking at that have been inspiring him. So Manav is actually he's also been exploring like various the merger of various creative mediums into like distinct visual languages, and he's actually going to start working at Ableton very soon in the next 2 months as a designer. So there's a lot of like niche areas that he's sort of exploring as a designer and a music producer and a synth enthusiast also. So what we are going to now do is we'll actually jump right into the session with Manav without much ado. And he'll actually take us through the history of audiovisual cultures first, and then to the various techniques that are used by contemporary artists and stuff that, we can explore together. So yeah, Manav, over to you.
Thanks, Suvani. Yeah, couldn't have put it better myself. So yeah, welcome everyone. I will not introduce myself again since Suvani's already done that. But yeah, as Suvani said, we'll kind of explore a sort of loose history of audiovisual culture and kind of the artistic practices that have influenced the field. Let's see if I can go to the next slide, if that works. There we go. So yeah, I'll give a bit of an intro, then we'll kind of trace the history of some of those artistic practices, and showcase a few projects that I've worked on. And then I've also got a few prompts for you to kind of take out of this session and maybe apply it to some of the music or the work that you're doing at GMI. And then we can look at some tools as well that you could use to create some of those outputs. So again, as Suvani mentioned, I kind of work in the realms of electronic music, visual art, interaction design, do a bit of creative coding and generative art. So my practice kind of overlaps in all these different mediums and approaches. So jumping into the core bit of this session, in today's sort of audio visual media culture, the kind of merger of images and sound is quite ubiquitous. Like we can't really imagine a time where those two things weren't so closely related. And the sort of technical and aesthetic boundaries of those two have become quite fluid. So, different art forms have influenced both the technology as well as kind of the aesthetic relationships between image and sound. So I'm not an art historian, and this is by no means kind of a deep dive into the history of everything within the realm of audiovisual culture, because it's quite diverse and you can go down paths in each of these specific practices as well. And this is not really a chronological history either. So we'll touch upon some key moments and sort of key.
Manav, just a second. There's a gray bar which is, I think, blocking your screen on the right.
Oh, that might be the.
Yeah, might be another window or something that you've opened.
I know it.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, we'll kind of trace the history of some sort of key moments within audiovisual culture and practices that kind of led to the modern day audiovisual culture that we sort of live in now. One thing to kind of remember that in terms of sound and light, they're quite distinct, at least in the physical realm. There's no possibility of actually combining them within the realm of physics. So the only place that sound and light actually meet is kind of our sensory perception. So we have eyes and ears, and our brain processes those signals and turns it into an audiovisual experience. So keep that thought as we're sort of going through some of these practices. And a lot of these early experiments that were happening were kind of preoccupied with creating this correlation between image and sound, trying to create this unifying theory that explains how sounds and images could be correlated or combined. This manifested into things like the color organs. So these were basically mechanical devices that kind of retrofitted with visual elements and trying to basically use the notes and the colors in a way that they kind of simultaneously produced. So there were loads of inventors and creators who tried to basically retrofit either existing pianos or harpsichords or organs to create these sort of synesthetic audiovisual experiences in the early days, but they were still kind of abstract and obviously quite clunky back in the day. But from there, if you can go further down almost 100 years, you find the emergence of abstract film that kind of coincided with abstract painting. And that the kind of correlation there was that abstract film also moved away from mimicking reality rather than, taking subjects as they would see it and interpreting them in more kind of personal ways or more subjective ways. So in that sense, abstract film also found a lot of common ground with music because they both sort of work in the domain of time. So, in music, you're kind of dividing time, and with film as well, you can kind of use the same concept with more abstract visuals. So the kind of official history of abstract film begins with the work of Walter Ruttmann. He was a German cinematographer, film director, and did a lot of experiments in early sort of abstract animation. We'll watch a little clip so you guys get a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. So yeah, you can kind of see here, he used this technique of light painting and basically constructed what is now commonly known as a light table, where he created thousands of paintings and then kind of shot them in sequence, similar to stop motion as well. Here the visuals were actually created first, and then the score was kind of created to support that. Similar experiments were also conducted by people like Hans Richter, who's another contemporary of Walter Ruttmann. His work didn't actually have music. So he was more interested in using visuals as having their own rhythm, and or sort of borrowing from concepts in music such as melody and motion to create a sort of visual music almost. Let's take a look. So yeah, as you can see, like perhaps doesn't have the same impact without the music, but Richter kind of insisted on having these films kind of silent and just focusing purely on the music, sorry, on the visuals themselves. Another sort of seminal figure within this space was Oscar Fischinger, who was another German-American abstract animator. And his work really influenced a lot of the modern day sort of motion graphics and animation that you see. He took it a step further where his synchronizations were almost kind of locked in with the music that he was trying to visualize. So I'll play a little bit of that as well. So you. So yeah, I mean, you can imagine back in 1938, kind of doing this by hand using sort of paper cutouts and then sort of pre-imposing them onto film. Must have taken ages for him to realize something like that, and something that's quite easy to do perhaps in these in the modern digital age. But he was really interested in having this synergy between visuals and music, and trying to correlate them as closely as possible. So from there, we kind of move on to graphical sound or graphical notation, which was more to do with representing music using sort of visuals or visual symbols that sort of sit outside the realm of perhaps traditional, music notation that you come across. Here, some of the people who were kind of notable were Morton Feldman, who was a Western classical musician, but his pieces were kind of exploring both sort of spatial compositions as well as more kind of abstract painting, and that's where his influence was. So a lot of his scores that he created didn't actually give specific instruction, and left a lot to the interpretation of the person reading that piece of music. So it was more kind of, as I said, yeah, instruction driven rather than really specific ways of playing the music or how loud it should be or what the duration of a particular note should be. All he did was kind of assign symbols to particular instruments, and then it was left up to whether it was an orchestra or a single musician kind of playing that piece of music. They would kind of pick the elements to their discretion. Another, so again, seminal figure within this space is John Cage, who was an avant-garde musician and theorist. His work went more into, like, further into the abstract realm, where this one called Fontana Mix was basically consisted of 20 pages of graphic materials, and 10 pages of these were sort of covered in curved lines, and then 10 sheets were kind of transparent film covered with sort of randomly placed dots. So you could combine these in lots of different ways to create scores and assign sort of musical occurrences to the elements that you see on the page. And again, these could be not just limited to music, but found sounds or voice, or creating music not just with musical instruments, if that makes sense. And again, here it's kind of leaving it up to the interpreter of the music to kind of conduct and create the composition based on what they see. A bit further down in history, you have Brian Eno, who is, again, a very prominent figure within the ambient music space. So his album Music for Airports was actually kind of first album that was released under this tag of ambient music. And here you can see kind of the back cover of his record, where he tried to denote the musical techniques that he used to create the score. So just for a bit of context, he was using sort of different length tape loops, and those basically included recorded phrases of piano, voice, and synthesizers. And then he constructed this apparatus that would, play at different speeds and, create this sort of ever evolving sort of piece of music. And that's kind of the technique that he was trying to denote within this score as well. So in the second row, you can kind of see the gaps between how the tapes were aligned and how the music actually unfolds and changes. On the flip side, we looked at how you could notate music, but people were also experimenting with how they could use visual inputs to actually generate music itself. A key figure in that space was Daphne Oram, who was part of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. So they did a lot of experiments in early electronic music, and she created this machine called the Oramix machine, which basically used optical sort of scanning technologies, where you would draw on a glass plate, and that would kind of interpret the music as well.
Daphne Oram was undoubtedly an extraordinary person with an amazing mind, and she was able to imagine electronic sounds that she couldn't actually make. So, having set up the BBC Radiophonic Workshop in 1958, she left pretty sharpish because she wanted to pursue her own ideas about how you could make electronic music, which in her mind was all about how you could change drawings into sounds, and that was her experimental program.
These sounds would be generated by drawing on a glass slide. A light dot would trace the waveform, and the sound generator would provide a tone based on the shape the dot followed. Further drawing on 35mm film strips was needed if you wanted to change the character of a note, like the pitch or echo.
I thought if one could break down the whole process into separate parameters, then define each of these in a drawing, which one could go back and rub out, one didn't want what one had done, This would both simplify the thing, it would make it much quicker, and I think
so you can kind of see the precursor to things like MIDI sequencing or digital audio workstations, where you're actually drawing in notes to generate music. So a lot of this work influenced kind of modern day softwares that allow you to kind of draw in notes and actually create music using sort of visual cues. Another figure within this space was Norman McLaren. So he was a Canadian animator and filmmaker, and he created loads of films for the National Film Board of Canada. And he's really a pioneer within the space of animation and experimental sort of filmmaking. So his work, Synchrony, was again using similar techniques where if you see on the left here, we have a piece of film, and all film has a optical soundtrack that's kind of read by the projector itself. So he chose to kind of draw directly onto that, and then also recreate those shapes and geometric artifacts onto the actual film as well. So you're kind of seeing and hearing the same thing at the same time, and in synchrony, as he's put. Yeah, let's take a look. Sorry, I got lost there. It's quite fascinating to kind of keep staring at it. But yeah, I mean, you can kind of see how the artists were trying to sort of bring this merger of sound and visuals and use kind of this visual input to bring these two mediums as close as they could. And there's loads of other films from Norman McLaren that you should check out, not specifically in the realm of like sound and image, but his experimental animations are quite notable, and I believe he won an Oscar for it as well back in the day. So yeah, do check it out as well. Coming sort of more to contemporary artists. So Avoca is a French artist collective that again work in the realm of sensory experiences and how we can kind of use one sense-making mechanism to kind of generate another one. So their piece of work called Discograph tries to experiment with that as well. I'll just play that clip for them. So yeah, this was basically an interactive installation. So visitors to the museum would come and kind of draw straight on this little paper disc, and I think they released it as an album as well, because there was, I think, about hundreds of different versions of this kind of rotating paper disc that were created. And again, you're kind of seeing how visual input is being used to generate music along with sort of existing technologies, or kind of using technologies in perhaps the way that they weren't meant to be used. So there's different modalities and modes that you can think about in terms of how you utilize kind of existing tools as well. I'll quickly talk about the painting as well, and how kind of there are attempts in terms of representing music within painting. Key example, which is a bit closer to home, is the Ragmala paintings. So these were basically a series of paintings that kind of represented different rags. And from the histories that we know about these paintings, they were meant to be enjoyed without the music itself, and were kind of considered to be equally enjoyable as much as kind of listening to the actual piece of music. So within the courts of that time, people would basically sit and stare at these paintings for long hours, kind of appreciating the sort of finer details, and trying to almost visualize or think about the music by looking at them. More kind of on the within Western art, an artist called Piet Mondrian, who created this painting called Broadway Boogie Woogie. So this was at the time when he'd moved to New York, and he kind of fell in love with the city and specifically boogie woogie music. And a lot of people, especially musicians, have kind of interpreted it as a jazz score almost, because it uses these sort of equally spaced, squares, and tries to represent kind of the movement of the city, as well as try and embody the music within this painting as well. So you can kind of see the attempts to kind of codify both space, visuals, as well as music into kind of this flat surface of painting canvas. From there, we kind of come on to the more obvious examples like music videos, and how kind of artists who were trying to again create this merger of visuals and sound. One example, and perhaps you might have already seen some of these videos, is by Michel Gondry. So he's done videos for Chemical Brothers, Daft Punk, and a lot of kind of notable artists. We'll take a look at Star Guitar, who's kind of his first attempt in sort of these synchronized music. So yeah, you can kind of see how he's tried to sync the scenery with, you know, specific musical elements within the track. You know, and there's also making a video, like how he kind of came up with the idea and how he tested the synchronization. So he kind of created this graphical score, trying to like map out all the different elements of the track, and then I think he used oranges and bottles to kind of recreate the scenery, and then yeah, basically kind of manipulating footage that he'd shot while vacationing in France or something. But yeah, you can kind of see how the effects are creating this more what do you call it, a merger of these two mediums quite closely. A more recent example is the work of Kevin McLaughlin, who does a lot of music videos for Max Cooper. Max Cooper is another electronic musician who kind of works with visuals and sounds as well. So yeah, I'll play a little bit of this. So yeah, you can kind of see here that McLaughlin is also trying to yeah, take this idea of repetition and borrow from constructs within music to, yeah, and pushes it to its extreme limits, almost creating these sort of hyper realities. I guess it goes a bit beyond the space of just visuals and music and kind of gets into this idea of space itself. And lastly, I'll talk about specifically around things around data art. So with kind of digital technology, now we've been able to like distill down you know, image and audio data into bits and bytes, and they've now become closer than ever. Basically, those can be represented and sort of overlapped in lots of different ways using this concept of data. And one artist who kind of does this with you know, a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Flair, I suppose, and kind of a lot of his work has been described as a sensory assault. So Roichi Ikeda is a Japanese visual artist who primarily works with data to create audiovisual experiences. And he tries to use data in kind of its most raw form. So as I was saying, kind of bits and bytes and lots of different data sources to create these almost infinite kind of experiences. I'll play out a little bit and let him explain his work.
Test pattern is just pure conversion of data to sound. You're experiencing just binary patterns. If you convert even very small email or data onto the language of zeros and ones, binary expression has very interesting patterns. This is ultimately the building block of information. You cannot reduce less than this, zero and black and white. You're forced to dive into the superhighway of the zeros and ones, the flow, and you're tested. Test pattern started from my live set. I need visual behind me when I do the DJing or the live performance. I have decided to show binary expression of sound, left, right, and the visualization, and zeros and ones, black and white, like a barcode. It's very simple. But then I realized it might be interesting to have an installation version. It's like you have a big magnified glass. It's a very enormous ocean of zeros and ones. You're really in the middle of the ocean, like really fast flow of data. It's very different experience. Dataverse and the other things is you observe from the outside. Test pattern, you have to be inside of the information and the data. Your iPhone has that kind of pattern. When you amplify visual, audio component like 1,000 times, 10,000 times with a magnified glass, the pattern is like that. It's really, really interesting. We have no clue, what it is. Even beat pattern is totally alien. No background, no hip hop and no techno. It's just like a crazy, Until eventually the expression gets so abstract, it has its own life, and you have no clue, but you just enjoy it.
So yeah, as you can see, he's talking about pure expression here, and there's no sort of conceptual mumbo jumbo in that sense, or trying to explain away the concept with fancy words. He's using pure data to create a sort of pure sensory experience in a sense, and really, as he put it, it takes on its own life, and also at that sort of scale, when you're kind of working within installations, you're kind of within that space, and you're kind of experiencing it, kind of sitting in the middle of it. I was lucky enough to see some of his work recently in London, and yeah, my ears were definitely ringing and my eyes were flashing, but it's worth checking out if you ever get the chance. Another artist within this space is Ruichi Kurokawa, who works within similar concepts as Ikeda was mentioning, but he uses more imagery from like natural data and natural images or images of landscapes, and tries to sort of reconstruct them into sort of these audiovisual experiences. So yeah, his work kind of is also concerned with kind of synesthetic experiences. So synesthesia is basically one sensory kind of feeling that leads to sensing something else. So like I said, hearing images, or seeing sounds, or tasting sounds as well. And it's a lot of people actually have this sort of naturally occurring, but what Kurokawa is trying to do is sort of recreate this in the digital realm, and really bring these two mediums as close as he can through the use of natural kind of constructs that he uses to kind of derive his work. So yeah, that was kind of a whirlwind tour of different artistic sort of practices that have tried to merge images and sounds. I can share a link to all of these after the session if you're kind of interested in diving deeper into any of these specific areas. So now I'd like to just maybe talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done within this space. And as you'll see from the examples that I'll show, and the history that we've kind of gone through, my work is kind of influenced by all these different sort of diverse artistic practices as well. So I'm currently working with a creative platform called Eclectic Labs here in London, which is basically concerned with kind of showcasing contemporary art, and they work within the space of experimental music and sort of cross-disciplinary practices as well. And their aim is to kind of really focus on experimentation and kind of find spaces not just within the physical realm, but also within digital spaces to kind of showcase work. So I've been helping them sort of build this platform that kind of celebrates this digital AV culture. So they commissioned, as part of this project, some sort of key experimental musicians working within the space of sound art, as well as composition and electronic music. And as part of that, they commissioned these AV posters to help kind of represent these soundtracks that they were creating. Just for a bit of context, this kind of started at the start of the pandemic. So they do have a physical space where they have lots of workshops and performances and concerts and stuff like that. Obviously, all of that kind of stopped, and then they were trying to think of how they could bring some of these experiences to the digital space. Yeah, that's kind of the challenge that they're still working towards. So I'll show a couple of videos that I created, and then we can talk a bit more about those. So this first piece was created for this artist called Bana Hafar, who's an American Lebanese electronic musician. And the idea here was to create this sort of map of like a brain synapses, but it's also looking at almost feels like looking at a city from really far away. And these are kind of the macro and micro level visual experiences that Bana had kind of alluded to. So that's kind of at a conceptual level, but then also the way that she created these tracks was using sort of field recordings, which were recorded in ambisonics. So doing sort of 3D recordings of different spaces, and again matching some of her techniques in terms of how she manipulated the sounds as well, and then trying to map that in visuals. I'll play another piece, which was from an artist called LA. He's a really sort of underground electronic ambient musician, and he's really hard to get in touch with. So this took like a few months to just build a 1-minute video with him, and he's quite secretive in that sense of his technique. So here it was left to kind of my interpretation of how I kind of perceive the track, and try to represent it using these sort of motion posters. So yeah, as I was saying, this guy is quite secretive, and yeah, there wasn't a lot of dialogue in terms of collaborating with him. I think he gave me one keyword, which is like floating.
What's his name? Sorry, Manav.
I only know him as LA. Like, I don't know what his real name is.
Like LA. Okay.
ELEH. So it's LA. Yeah. Okay. He's based in the States. So he says. I don't know where he is precisely based, but I have an email from him which was just one word and said like floating, and I was like, okay, I'll try and make sense of that. And I'll just play one more that was kind of created as part of this series as well. This was for an artist called Pascal Savy, who is based in the UK and then also works out of France. So with this one, it was more around sort of trying to create this this idea of almost like moving graffiti in a sense. So Pascal was used to do a lot of graffiti as a young artist before he got into music, and that's that kind of sort of influenced the visuals that I created for him in terms of yeah, these sort of constantly shifting patterns of sort of abstract graffiti elements in a sense. So I'll talk a bit about the tools that I use for creating some of these works. And there's primarily two that are my kind of go-to tools for creating these generative audiovisual pieces. The first one is Touch Designer, which is basically a visual programming language. And that's used for creating a lot of multimedia sort of content, whether that's live visuals, installations, as well as kind of more sort of static video as well. And then the other one is Max MSP, which is quite a seminal piece of software within kind of generative audio. And it was one of the first to kind of experiment with this idea of visual programming and more sort of node-based programming to create complex sort of audio processing and sort of going beyond the realms of what sort of physical instruments or other software instruments at the time were able to do. And yeah, I kind of use them because obviously there's a bit of a learning curve to pick these up, but they're definitely a bit more easier than trying to learn to code, which I have been telling myself I will do for the last 10 years, but have never gotten around to. So these kind of allow you to, tweak various parameters. They're kind of inbuilt modules that do specific things, but let you kind of generate visuals as well as sound. So for a lot of the pieces that I was showing before, I basically use this audio analysis tool. So taking input from either a simple stereo file and kind of extracting the data that it's providing. So here you can kind of see frequency data, and there's more kind of impulse data from the audio pieces as well. This is quite a crude example, but you can kind of see the kick drum here affecting the size of the circle, and then kind of the artifacts around it are also being driven by sort of different audio parameters that are kind of mapped to various visual parameters. So yeah, that was kind of a quick look into how I created some of these pieces. The second project that I'll talk about is a recent music video that I created for this artist called Varsity Stars. So he got in touch with me at the start of the year through Instagram. And yeah, Instagram is kind of my primary gallery. My work has not been shown at prestigious galleries or anywhere of note. So I do a lot of my kind of showcasing through Instagram. And then, yeah, basically he got in touch and he wanted to create this music video. I can sort of play this through. So yeah, here again, like the inspiration for the aesthetic was kind of inspired by these VHS tapes. I don't know if you guys are too young to know what VHS tapes are, but they used to be little cassettes that used to put in and just play video. But like the fascinating thing about some of these blank VHS covers was their graphic design that was on them. And that was kind of the kind of key aesthetic element that I used for inspiration for this video. So yeah, I kind of created or sort of collected all these different covers, and then started to sort of simplify and abstract them and create sort of more cohesive visual language for that would sort of go into creating the actual final video. So I started with these kind of static frames and blocked out loosely what I was aiming for, and then rather than using more kind of generative processes, this was created in Illustrator. So I did a bit of animation just to kind of block out how I wanted things to move, and then we're taking them into the final software, which turned into quite a crazy After Effects file with, as you can see, my naming went for a toss. So I was trying to be a bit more organized at the start, but then as I was kind of going deeper into it all went haywire. But this was kind of more in the traditional sense of frame by frame animation rather than using, I suppose, more sort of randomly generated visuals. So yeah, kind of hand drawing each frame and how it moves and how it kind of syncs up to the music, which again brings that synchronization much more closer between what you're listening to and what you're seeing on screen. And yeah, it's coming to the last bit. I had some sort of prompts for you guys to maybe take outside of the session if you're interested in creating something with an existing piece of music that you're working on, or maybe it's an album or an EP or something like that. And yeah, you could choose one of these, which could be either trying to create some album art, maybe doing a graphic score, so kind of the examples that we showed earlier. And then maybe some sort of motion vignette could be used on your social media channels or something like that. In terms of, like, I don't want to give you any specific aesthetic directions, but you could, for example, with something like a graphic score, you can try and break down your track into different visual elements and then try to maybe visualize it as a poster, or maybe create the score not linearly, but maybe it's a circular kind of format, or it's more randomized, or you're just trying to represent different musical elements using visual cues. So these could be things like geometric shapes. You could also use images. There's a host of techniques that you can kind of explore. So yeah, I encourage you to kind of try it out. And again, I don't want to specify any tools that you can use. Maybe to try and use something that's a bit more, I guess, easy to learn, and something that I do as well is use mobile apps to kind of ideate. And there's a whole bunch of these that you can find. So I can share these later on, but just a few examples of apps. One of them is called Whirl, which sort of creates these 3D shapes, and you can try different permutation and combinations to sort of generate lots of visual artifacts. Another one that I kind of use just as a way of doodling some of the ideas when I'm either traveling or on my commute, just to think about how I want to manipulate images. So Glitch Studio is quite nice, and it's free to use. So you'll see a lot of more sort of advanced manipulation or visual manipulation techniques that are kind of that you can kind of achieve just using a few taps. There are a few others called, one's called Grow, which is similar to Glitch, and another one called Isometric that kind of lets you create these sort of impossible shapes and combine them in different ways. There's another one which is more specific to like video VJing. So Glitch Clip Maker again does similar things in terms of taking a piece of visual input and then you can sort of manipulate it using different effects and stuff like that. And Stella is another one that kind of does similar things. So yeah, that's kind of it for this session. I know that was quite a lot to take in, a bit of a ramble, but hopefully you found some interesting bits that inspire you to kind of explore the visual side of your music as well. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Manav. That was quite rich, and the music video is quite phenomenal, actually. I mean, do you think you could also share a link to it in the chat in case
Yeah, sure.
any of us want to watch it again? Any questions or just observations, comments from any of you? Have any of you attempted some sort of visual experiments on or with your music? Anyone like who's tried some sort of animations or drawings or sketches or any other sort of techniques?
Doesn't look like it.
Pratik, have a question? Okay, no. Okay. So, Manav, one quick question, which may or may not like resonate with some of the students also. So there's a lot of like visual styles and languages also, no, that even you've been working with it, that you walked us through. So, for instance, in the video project, in the music video project, or in the motion posters, do you like begin with any kind of principles of visual composition? Like, for instance, the Max Cooper repetition video. You know, repetition is the key kind of thing on which then, you know, the visual language builds itself. Definitely. So what about like the music video and all of that?
So yeah, as I was saying, like, yeah, there's kind of borrowing from concepts within music. So things like repetition or rhythm and melody or even things like, you know, the tone and the volume or the dynamics of the track itself, that kind of are foundational elements. But a lot of it, to be honest, is intuition, and I will set up some parameters and see what happens, and then kind of as I'm working through it, try and fine tune things. So as I said at the start of this session, you know, that truly audiovisual experiences only happen in our perception, and it's really a subjective experience of what you're seeing and what I'm seeing. So I kind of use that as a way of leading me down that path where it sounds a bit cliched, but yeah, there's that moment where I think, yes, this has reached that point where you know it satisfies my auditory and visual needs and what I'm trying to like explore. Obviously, I have a background in design, so some of it is more ingrained when I'm kind of working on these things. But I also use inspiration. I'll create sort of mood boards and visual cues that I'm trying to work towards. So as I was saying in the example of the music video, sort of using these VHS covers as a starting point to then turn that into a more sort of distinct and unique language for a piece that I'm creating. So yeah, that's kind of a rough approach.
But you know, I really think that the prompts that you share at the end, I'll really urge all of you to actually just sit with those prompts for a bit, right? So there's 3, if you can just open that screen again, Manav, once. Sure. There's 3 prompts here. So either there's a motion, so there's a motion poster, there's a album cover, and motion vignette, album art, graphic score, and motion vignette. So if any of you wants to sort of pick up a track that you've already been working on or that's completed, or maybe there's an EP that you have in mind, you know, that you're about to put out into the world, or any other kind of work in development, work in progress also, you could perhaps look at the session as a way to start thinking of what could be the visual to support this. So if it's an album cover that you're kind of thinking about, what is the most minimal kind of an album cover that you could make that corresponds with your track or with your album, and using some of the inspiration perhaps from the session. This could be an exercise, it could be a fun, it could also be a light sort of exercise for all of you to engage with.
Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have to use any digital tools. You could just sketch
Yeah.
on paper as well. So whatever you're kind of comfortable with. But it just encourages you to kind of think about your music in quite a different light, and maybe that sort of cross collaboration between visuals and sound will kind of inspire you to maybe think about the track in a different way, or maybe you could also use images as a starting point for new music that you're creating. So it could work in reverse as well. But given that you guys are primarily music students, and I'm assuming you have music that you're already creating, it feels like a good starting point to try and visualize it in different ways. And yeah, feel free to break out of these as well. It doesn't necessarily need to sit within these specific outputs. But yeah, even if it's just a sketch of a track that you're working on.
Also, like just setting some constraints. So for instance, you mentioned that you begin with setting up some constraints for yourself.
Yeah.
So even something as simple as picking 3 basic shapes and 3 colors.
Yeah.
And you could do like hand cutouts. You could sketch, you could do hand cutouts, or you could do a digital kind of rendition of it with basic tools that Manav just shared with you, or the sort of mobile based apps and stuff. I mean, I know Illustrator and all of that can be a little intimidating to get into right from the beginning, but it's also something that can be picked up quickly if you feel the urge to. So if any of you feel like picking that up, please just reach out to any of us and we can help out with resources as well.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm happy to if you end up experimenting with this, share your experiments, and I can help you kind of either develop them if you want, or yeah, even provide some kind of feedback if you want to just bounce off some ideas. So more than happy to kind of see some of the work that you guys come up with. So yeah, any more questions from anyone? Otherwise, I can let you guys go.
I think it's going to leave them with a lot of things to think about, because I think it's all the more in this day and age, in the times that we live in, the notions, I mean, of course, the form of visual arts has always been around, but I think it's becoming all the more out here, more in pandemic times, even more, because the concepts of having those music videos that you would have of the grandeur or the location based or people based and all is all going through a change.
Yeah.
And all of that, and it's all the more giving a great opportunity for people to collaborate with visual artists and think of that medium as an expression of your music, and probably explore how your music goes into that, because and that even travels into hosting your shows. Now a lot of artists now in India also are having their performances with a visual artist collaborative, wherein you do have a background of how it's thematically working with the music. I mean, I remember it was fall 19, our concert, wherein in fact for our concert also we had one of our student who's also a graphic designer and an illustrator. We collaborated with her to work with visual art of her her interpretation of the music that was going to be performed on the stage, and having that kind of thematic experience being put out for the audience. Unfortunately we couldn't do it because she fell ill and we couldn't take it through, but we had already started working on it and going that, because it really brings out another dimension to your music and puts it visually very interestingly in a way which you would not think of.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of the key driver for me, where they're not kind of mutually exclusive and they work together. And yeah, as you were saying, kind of it's a kind of given with live performances, whether you're kind of doing it remotely or virtually or even in a physical space. A visual element is performance and is now becoming like the norm almost in that sense. So yeah, it's kind of these multi-sensory experiences.
Yeah.
And how do you kind of realize those along with the core music that you're creating?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's going beyond just electronic music. Earlier, it used to be something that one would specifically think of it with a genre specific.
Yeah.
But a lot of performing artists now, it's now transcended those barriers, those ideas and notions of how it would be typically for that style of music. It has transcended that a lot. So it's no more just restricted to those styles. It's gone. Yeah, so if you are a singer songwriter or anything, doesn't debar you from exploring that.
Yeah,
yeah, definitely.
You see more and more artists, in fact, doing all of it, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's agnostic of kind of the type of music that you make. So yeah, hopefully you found this interesting, remotely interesting.
I'm going to pick your brain on Illustrator. I've been wanting to pick it up for the longest time, and it just intrigues me, because for me it's always like, you know, I don't want to be an expert, but I would love to know the art, you know.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm going to take away from the people who do it. I mean, I would still continue to collaborate, but it just helps to know the language.
Absolutely.
You know? You can then I feel then you can share better. You can even think better about your idea. Sometimes your ideas get restricted because you don't know the medium, what all that medium can do for you.
Yeah. Totally.
I mean, I often use tools as a way of exploring the tool itself, but then also exploring aesthetics that
precisely
specifically allows, because there are tools which have a wide range of things and you can do lots of things and create lots of different outputs, but then there are specific tools that take you down a specific path almost, in a sense. So tools are like a great way of just familiarizing yourself with techniques, but yeah, you kind of there's an element of chance involved where you know you might end up finding something that you're like, oh yeah, this is the thing that I want to sort of take forward. So, yeah,
right.
Just go for it.
Great. So yeah, I think sorry, go on, Megha.
No, I was just saying thanks to Manav. It was really
thanks a lot for taking the time out. Thank you all for joining in, and I hope the session leaves you with some sort of an urge to also, you know, experiment a bit with the ideas that you have and to just like throw them out there in whatever form you can. Manav, just drop in your email ID here as well in case anybody would like to, you know.
I'll share this presentation so you kind of have access to
that'll be
examples.
The session's also recorded, so if any of you want to revisit something, you could.
So we'll share the session and the presentation. That's really nice of you, Manav, and even Manav's contacts. So all those who may wish to reach out to him later or whenever, please feel free to do that.
Cool. Manav, what's your Instagram thing? There it is. I'll just put it on the chat. Okay, cool. Okay, thank you guys. You have another class to rush off to, and Manav, you have stuff to get on with. So
thanks for inviting me, and speak to you all soon. Cheers.
Keep the conversation going. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.